Hey, welcome to the Cloud and Virtualization Guru panel here at F5. We're at F5 Corporate, and today I get to host. I usually am behind the camera, so it's kind of fun to get out in front here to talk to everybody. Today we're going to talk about cloud and virtualization, and gathered a few F5 folks here. You can see from the F5 badge, he's just not an excited F5 user. He's actually an F5 employee here, like me.
Does not belong.
You can tell those of us that are proud of being F5 employees versus not. But okay, never mind. We got Jeff Koslow here. Jeff, you want to tell everybody what you do here at F5?
Jeff Koslow. I now run the product development platform security group. Previous to that, I actually spent a lot of time developing the virtual edition of Big IP. So I've got some experience with virtualization, low-level stuff.
Yeah, Jeff, you've been a great resource for us when we moved out to cloud and getting into. Hey, we need some help with vCloud and importing the layouts and stuff. So
DevCentral is a good thing.
Yes, it is. Stephen Fisher, what are you doing? What do you do here at F5?
Yeah, so I'm Stephen. I've been at F5 for about a little over 5 years, and I've been working with our orchestration and cloud technologies. So I'm product development manager officially of cloud and orchestration. Most of my team has been focused on Microsoft integration and VMware integration historically, and we're building a cloud platform, and some of the APIs have been announced, and some of the work has been released. The F5 management pack for System Center, vCenter, and vCloud Director integration. So
very cool. And we've got, lastly, Brent Blood.
I'm Brent Blood, manager of product management engineering. I work right now on IAPS, but prior to that, I did some work. I wrote our VMware vSphere plugin, and I did some research on virtualization technology.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, I remember that vSphere plugin. So
it was a couple years ago.
Yeah, it was a while back, but that was an iControl app, right?
It was.
You integrated in for. You talk a little bit about that. What?
Sure. It used the VMware vSphere APIs for embedding applications inside of the vSphere client, and it used iControl to manipulate big IPs and do some common tasks that, like it could automatically add virtual machines to pools, and it could do some automation of rebooting systems so that you could safely boot off connections without having to just cut off your traffic, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's that big tie between the virtualization piece. It's great. I can spin up and down servers, but you still need to integrate that with the network layer, right? Being able to, you want to avoid having to manually go and add these things. So it's pretty cool to be able to inject the logic right in there into that backend servers themselves to say, hey, I'm up and running. Configure me, add me to the network, add me to this application, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Very
cool. So, cloud and virtualization. It's a topic that has been on the rise, popularity-wise, in the last few years. Started as you hear cloud this, cloud that. There's Amazon Cloud Services. There's private cloud. There's the public cloud. So you got Amazon and Microsoft, Azure. You've got private cloud. You've got public-private. You've got hybrid cloud. But all of these things kind of tie into the virtualization layer and the ability to dynamically allocate services. So what do you guys, maybe we can start with a couple minutes here. We've got a couple of questions coming in, but we'll start with kind of what we think. What's your definition of cloud? I know that's a hard question. It's like saying, what's your definition of blue? But Jeff, we'll start with you, Jeff.
I think we've already seen a couple of questions, so I might be kind of leading into this one. But if I were to talk about the cloud, I would start with Amazon, because that's what I think most people can wrap their head around the easiest. I'm not sure it's always the best model necessarily to describe what a cloud is, because it's kind of low level and kind of high level at the same time.
Right.
Can't describe that much better. So I would start that way, and I would say, you can spin these machines up in the cloud, and they can provide you services. Beyond that, the cloud starts to get fuzzy to me. So
it is. Stephen, you're more ingrained into the cloud and what F5 does with cloud. So is there a definition for what cloud means?
So I can tell you a few of the different pivots that my team uses to view cloud services and cloud technologies. But I tend to think of the simplest definition of cloud as essentially just abstracting away services to manage either software or hardware. So that's typically the buzz around it, is basically just simplifying and abstracting away problems that infrastructure or orchestrations had in the past. Specifically, though, what it actually maps to our technology base. So we have infrastructure as a service, which is essentially networking, storage, computing, all these different parts of the data center and parts of applications. And those are basically just collected as infrastructure. So that's one type of cloud service. And the example for that would be something like EC2, where they provide a computing fabric, or rack space, and vCloud Director and Bluelock, where they provide basically a fabric of computing resources for somebody to use. The second one would be platform as a service, and that's typically developers tend to think of their application development as based on top of an API set. So platform as a service, that type of cloud technology, is the cloud APIs for things like Azure, where they have storage APIs, or they have web APIs, or they have authentication APIs. So that's a different kind of cloud service, where they're not actually operating on networking or storage. They're just using sort of application developer APIs. And a third one, which is software as a service, is the one that's a little more commonly associated with things like hosted Exchange or hosted email. So Google, Gmail is an example sort of like that. That's a little more consumer friendly, but there's also hosted Exchange. A variety of different providers serve that. There was also hosted SQL and hosted Oracle. And then the other pivot besides those sort of tiers of cloud services are public and private cloud. And that really just comes down to, you can think of your traditional data center, the traditional build out a data center in a location with fiber and storage racks and all the different application server hardware. That's sort of your typical private cloud. And you want to manage that, whether 10 years ago or now, that's your private cloud. It's basically your traditional data center. And then public cloud, like Jeff mentioned, is the more sort of, it's up in the public cloud from the perspective of, I have a local data center, a local application, and I'm outsourcing, or I'm sort of giving to a third party the infrastructure ownership.
Yeah, so there's security implications, right, with public
Absolutely.
cloud and private cloud and the types of applications you'd run. DevCentral, we talked about this and announced this back at our partner summit at Agility, that we moved our whole infrastructure from our IT department here into a fully virtualized environment up at, we went with Bluelock as our cloud provider right now. So we've took all of our hardware products, all of our big IP products, LTM, ASM, Web Accelerator, WAM, APM, and moved those to a virtualization app, VE instances running. And our applications are all virtualized now. So you talk about virtualization. For us, moving to a cloud provider, moving to cloud, meant we're not tied down to the restrictions that we have with hardware. We got a new version of the software. Oh no, it doesn't. It's not compatible with this hardware. Now we have to order some new hardware or upgrade that and keep that the maintenance on that. Oh, this piece of hardware is the memory's bad in it, so we've got to get it serviced and those things. So that's for us what the cloud piece has helped with. It's allowing us to be a lot more agile with not just our applications but our infrastructure as well.
That's a great use case for the cloud, and I think a lot of other people have had successes of varying degrees. You guys seem to have done a good transition.
Yeah.
And transitioned very well. I'm not sure that always happens, but I think my guess is that time up front spent planning goes an awful long ways in the end. I've seen your diagrams before, and they look well put together. So
our network diagram looks very similar to
the hardware.
The hardware, it's like, okay, this is your network infrastructure, but for us the difference was that it was virtualized. We didn't make use of a lot of third-party cloud services and that kind of thing, which is definitely something you could do to help scale your applications or for computing resources or storage resources for the simple service storage service from Amazon, being able to store your images out there, and so you don't want to pay the storage costs, but you deal with the throughput. That's definitely something we could move into if it was interesting for us. Brent, cloud. What do you think? What's your definition of cloud?
Well, start where without cloud and virtualization, you just have a bunch of servers running specific operating systems and applications, and switches with VLANs, and the routers with routes, and firewalls with firewall rules. And somebody has to put all those things in place, specifically to make those applications work and those flows of traffic work. Then you add on virtualization, Now you have a way to take one physical piece of hardware and run many different operating systems and applications on it, and to kind of have some fluid provisioning of the various things you need to make that work. Cloud is then having many of those servers and having the network infrastructure in place with automation and orchestration, so that when you go to provision that, you no longer have to have someone go out and manually add routes and firewall rules and provision the operating system. You just push a button, and that software and kind of the fabric on top of the cloud is really what puts it all together to make that all just work. And that to me, that intelligence is what makes cloud, what it is.
Yeah, automation has been there. We introduced iControl way back when, as far as a way to automate your network with your applications. But automation really is critical when you're moving to a cloud type service, right? Because you don't have your network operators on hand with the console, right? It's to be able to successfully scale for us when we're hitting bandwidth capacity or through user capacity on the site. We want to be able to spin up servers, provision those, and monitor that, and make sure that that's all seamless, right? And you also don't want to overcompensate, the customers that are online retail, right, for holidays. You need to plan capacity for that, but you don't want to run at that capacity year round, right? Because that's expensive. So being able to downshift is as important as being able to upshift too. Let's jump into a few questions before they roll off the screen here. We got a question from Brad. I think some of these are going to be tough ones, so we'll see.
This is not an easy question.
It is not. Well, it's a tough panel. From Brad from Seattle. Would like to hear about security in 3-tiered, like from the client, server, and database cloud applications. Specifically, April, we lost the screen there. Okay, specifically, how do you prevent unauthorized apps running of database access in APIs?
So I'll start with that one. There's not a lot of detail in this question. That's something that Amazon is not particularly good at, is forming a 3-tier. You can have your private cloud behind, but in some cases you need access to that. The only thing I can say is security works best in layers, and so you're going to have to try to figure out how to move those tiers around. And I'm not aware of all the cloud architectures that are available, so maybe we can expand on that question a little bit. Does anybody have anything else to say?
Well, kind of how we rolled out with our move to, and it was important from us from a customer information security standpoint, as well as our own internal security, is the way we deployed it. So we went with private cloud.
Right.
We went with, and it mimics what we would do if we set it up in a DMZ-based IT data center.
Sure.
So we've got a single point of entry. We're using our access products to get in, and you've got to, in the public environment, you've got to be ensured that you're not having guys coming in from the side. So part of it is relying on your cloud provider and doing research on them as to how they've designed their infrastructure, right?
I had forgotten about that. The ability to use our own VPN to get into yours that seemed powerful.
And we're using ASM, our security module, as well to protect against attacks on the site and code injections and things like that. But the question I think with cloud with regards to security on 3 tiers, the same question as you would as if you're setting it up internally, right? On hardware, it's a hard problem. There's no one answer, I don't think.
So let me. That's a good question as far as when I was earlier mentioning private and public cloud. Also, security and access is a great use of a hybrid cloud. And a lot of times people wonder, what is a hybrid cloud? They hear the same kind of buzzword, private, public, hybrid. Security is actually a really great use case scenario for that, because in a sense, when you're building out those tiers, you're trying to basically isolate, as Jeff mentioned, isolate your risk and reduce your surface attack areas. So you're not going to expose necessarily your back-end financial data or your private information, usernames and passwords at every tier. You'd have some kind of token or some kind of way to pass through that identity through the tiers. And so public-private cloud hybrids are a great way to map that into this sort of similar model, where you basically have all of your critical personal private data, the financial data, stored in your private cloud, your traditional data center. You have that locked down. You may have that only in one data center. You might have replication. You might have all the hard disks, of course, encrypted, and very reduced physical access to that information. But you decide you want to actually, as we talked about bursting, you want to expand your capacity. You're going global with some kind of a a sales event or some kind of marketing event. And so that's a good example where you'd want to put your front door up in the public cloud. And things like ASM, but also APM for access and VPN, those are great uses where you can put your front door up in the public cloud, give your users a much larger capacity threshold, and then again keep your private data sort of localized and the attack area reduced. And so that's also a good way to go to your customers, or for providers or even IT centers that want to provide a much larger amount of access to their applications, but still control that data.
Do we support semantic Ventu? I don't know what semantic Ventu is because I'm not big in this space. So this is from David. Does any of us know what semantic
I'm not aware of what that is. No.
So you've stumped us. You win the squishy ball if you want to call in. We'll look that up and we'll post on the reply here. I don't know if that means if we support it from an infrastructure standpoint or if it's a compatible product. So we'll have to look at that one. Rehan said, can somebody tell me a suitable algorithm for RDP sessions and their comparison with other algorithms? I'm not sure if I know the answer to this one either.
Honestly, I don't know RDP protocols.
Yeah.
AES.
We'll look into this one too as well. If you got more questions on this, post them up to the Advanced Design and Config forum up on DevCentral, and we'll try to get you some answers. Here's one. Can a VE work with vShield and not just as a VM?
Do you want me to take that?
Steven?
Go ahead.
At least initially. I think there's probably two ways to take in this question. If it's the question around can our VE support integration with vShield, I can speak to that. If the alternative question is, how does our VE work on different platforms, including vSphere and vCenter, which is typically tied to vShield Manager from VMware, then I'll let Jeff speak to the sort of host, the hypervisor integration. But as far as, and the reason I'm going to jump in here is because actually yesterday we had a press release, and I just came back from VMworld where we were talking about integration work that we're doing between F5's management and control plane stacks and also VMware's equivalent management plane and control plane. And so vShield is actually, I'm going to assume that they're referring to vShield Manager from VMware. And vShield Manager is essentially the way for VMware-based applications and services to integrate with a virtual network. So as we were talking earlier about Brent was describing, you have your networking, you have your VLANs, and your routes and your switches. So the way VMware represents that is they build what's called a virtual switch. And essentially, because all the VMs are running, all the applications are running on virtual hosts, there's no physical network hardware they can interact with directly. So vShield is the way for VMware, their software, to manage the virtual switch that essentially allows traffic to pass between these different virtualized applications. And so the way BIG-IP interacts with that, and actually BIG-IP and F5 are really great in the sense that our model is essentially completely based on virtual network traffic. We have virtual servers, pool members. It's a way to virtualize physical interfaces. Load balancing is a pretty obvious example where you have a bunch of servers and then a front door or virtual IP address. But that's very similar to the way these virtual switches work. The difference is the virtual switch actually has to switch the packets to these different VMs. There's one physical interface, and then there's multiple virtual machines running behind that. So we actually integrate, and this was announced yesterday, we actually integrated our Enterprise Manager product with the vShield Manager product. And what that essentially allows customers to do is a couple of really important things. Number one is we have a mapping between the physical interfaces on the network and the virtual interfaces. So we can pass traffic as we've always done between virtual servers and pool members, but also on the VMware side, we also know where the virtual machines are running. So we can actually route traffic directly to them, and as virtual machines are started up and stopped, we can keep that in sync. The second piece, and this is actually the really important piece going forward, is that traditionally all of this infrastructure, we talked about cloud and sort of the buzzword, it's all been managed inside the NOC. And network engineers have to go and deal with a lot of what looks like to the outside world is esoteric types of terminology, VLANs or routes and switches and ports. And typically application developers, when they go deploy Exchange or Oracle or their their front door web application, they don't understand that or they don't want to deal with it. Their focus is really on application logic. And so what VMware and F5 are doing is basically helping to bridge that by providing a unified model for deploying applications. So instead of developers having to deploy VLANs and ports and switches and routers, they basically just say, I want to deploy Exchange, and through the VMware vShield Manager interface, they basically can configure our IAP applications. So we have a consistency between IAPs and the VMware application model. Now again, the other answer for that question has to do with the hypervisor host, and I'll let Jeff answer that.
I'm not all that familiar with vShield, so I'm not really prepared to answer that question.
You want to talk about the VXLAN or the hosting the VE on top of vCenter?
And with
what kinds of work we've done, or the performance, or
no. No, we
He's
can,
security now.
Yeah, we can discuss performance.
It's secure.
Later. We have what we have, our 1 gigabit performance layer, and yeah.
Well, there is a question here from Risto about performance. We've reached the point where virtualization. Have we reached the point where virtualization can handle 45,000 new connections opened and closed each second with about 300 megabits per second? I have not seen a virtualized network that is able to handle more than 1,000 connections per second on compatibly configured hardware.
I don't have performance numbers of the virtual edition in front of me. That is an awful lot of connections per second, and yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Well, that kind of can get into a hybrid environment as well, right?
Yeah.
So we were worried about performance. Honestly, for us, for DevCentral, we were worried about SSL offload because we're 100% SSL and can virtual environment and VE support, because we're not relying on hardware for SSL offload. It's
right.
The software that's handling it now
right.
when we're in a VE environment. And we built that contingency into our plan as if our servers couldn't handle it on a pure VE layer. Throw a piece of hardware on front that load balanced across them
right.
and help distribute some of that stuff just from a
to do
lower
yeah.
level. So that is a thing for a hybrid approach. I can't really speak to those numbers exactly. I don't know, Brent, if you know performance numbers.
Not connections per second. No, the throughput is well within what we can do, but connections per second, I'm not sure.
Connections per second is, I think, what's hurting there.
Yeah.
The throughput is well within what we can do. Yeah, but SSL. Since you asked, we can talk about SSL. The virtual edition.
Open the Pandora's box there.
Well, obviously RSA 2048-bit is very expensive.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Hardware.
We're doing 2K keys on our side.
You are doing 2K key.
Yep.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
not
Yeah, that's
advise
not cheap.
anything
Yeah.
less than that. That is certainly not cheap. If you're well underwater under the RSA in almost all cases, you've got to do that with the Intel chip.
Mm-hmm.
The latest Intel chips do have the AES-NI instructions, and the virtual edition does take advantage of that past version 11.
Okay.
And so you can get AES accelerated with the virtual edition past version 11. And you should see, if you've got long-lived connections, once you do the RSA handshake, you should see significant better performance with the newer AES. Is it Westmere? Do you remember, Brent?
I
believe it's Westmere, but
yeah.
it's the new AES-NI instructions is where those occurred.
I think the second gen Nehalem stuff started to have that.
Yeah.
It's funny we're talking about a cloud, but we're pushing ourselves into
Pushing
virtualization.
back into hardware.
So it's
Yeah.
a good thing that we're combining the two topics here. There's another question. From guest, can you build the iRole with an option to control the big IP as I control? I guess that gets into the automation piece of it. And I'm reading around this, but what I think you're trying to ask is, can I build an iRole that actually executes iControl calls to run the configuration on the device? If that's the case, Brent, can you do that? I know the answer to that, but do you know the answer to that?
I can think of some bad ways that you might be able to accomplish that, but I think it takes you out of the realm of what's supportable. So
Yes.
So I wouldn't go that route. Even if you figured something out, it's not a good idea.
Now, so there's no native built-in iControl calls to configure the full configuration layer on the device from within an iRole, and mainly that's been a performance thing that we've designed in. The goal for iRole is to be as fast as possible. Now, there are some workarounds you can do. You can use logging. High-speed logging is another way. Not many people are using that, but it is a way that you can send out, and also with the newer versions, the socket connections. So you can build your own server from an iRules, open a socket, send a command, and close it, and then you have your daemon that's sitting, running, listening on it, execute those commands.
Since you brought it up, you could make a sideband connection right to the iControl portal over localhost, and you can talk to it that way.
Yeah, that's not really recommended.
There's definitely some security dangers in there.
Yeah.
Invoking
It's a bad idea.
invoking control plane changes from data plane traffic is inherently dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes.
So actually, let me just jump in there and sort of take it down this tangent of away from unsupported solutions.
Yes.
So it's actually an interesting question because I think what's sort of it's getting at is the sense that you have this very high performance data plane, which has not only a significant amount of throughput, but also a lot of visibility into your network application's health and availability. And the idea, especially as it relates to cloud, is how can you take that knowledge and then map that back to your capacity elasticity?
Right.
Essentially, how can I basically manage my capacity, my data center availability based on all this intelligence that Big IP is providing? And traditionally, iRules has not only the visibility, but also has that sort of real-time configuration support. So people typically write iRules because they're tied to, for example, Exchange or SharePoint, and they make sort of implicit configuration decisions. They're switching traffic between different servers or different locations based on the application. So how this maps to the cloud and how it's actually really valuable is if you think about it in terms of traditionally the model for most data center orchestration automation is around, we have a SOAP API control, but it's really about sort of request response and periodic changes. And the way the world is shifting, again, sort of abusing the term cloud, is you take the abstraction a little higher, and instead of managing configuration against the network or application schema, you're looking at it as one giant fabric of resources. And how do you manage that intelligently? And the key challenge there, and we've got a lot of work on this, and my team's been doing a lot of work on this in the last number of years, but nothing to announce at the moment. The key challenge there is how do you take that sort of real-time responsiveness of iRules and then map that to your control plane, map that to your application's capacity and your infrastructure capacity. And to be honest, I think that's one of the challenges that the industry has had for a number of years, is that most industry vendors build these static APIs for managing little bits of configuration, but they typically manage them at a very low frequency. They add a virtual server and they assume it's going to take a week to go and deploy Exchange. So it's okay that it takes a lot of time for the API calls to happen, or it's a very expensive operations scenario. And what we want to do at F5 definitely is take the same kinds of performance that we have in iRules and then map that into the cloud space so that we can give both DevOps and also the NOC and the app engineers a way to get their applications up and reliable and elastic in minutes instead of hours or weeks. And so we don't have anything to announce today, but I can definitely say the stuff that we've done with VMware is definitely tied to that, and there'll be much more to announce soon.
Does VRRP work in the virtual network? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I'm not sure what VRRP is.
I think you got the wrong guys here on this question. The network configs. We'll post that up the advanced design and config forum. We'll see what we can get for you. This one looks like it's to me from Billy. What criteria did you use to choose BlueLock as your cloud provider? Were there other vendors you considered? Perhaps you're not at liberty to answer. I'm just curious. Well, I can talk a little bit about it. The first criteria for us was something we looked at a couple different vendors from the hybrid space. Our original thought is let's go to a hybrid model. We'll get some F5 gear out there to front our things. We'll virtualize our application servers, and for us, our goal is DevCentral, and it may be a different, I'm sure it's a different thought process that you would be going through. Ours is evangelists. First of all, we have to run our community, but it's also, from evangelism standpoint, we need to highlight the products that we're using. So our goal was to be 100% virtualized. And VMware, BlueLock is one of the top tier VMware hosting providers. They're really tight with VMware. their first tier. They're like when we went out and installed, they had their VMware engineers on site working with us. So that partnership with them and VMware, how close they were, was very important. The fact they were relatively close to us here. We've got some guys out in St. Louis, and it was just a good business relationship with us as well. There's other hosting providers out there, and VMware has a distribution. I think Colt in the UK and some other providers that provide the same kind of level of service. But for us, it was somebody who was full at this point was 100% VMware infrastructure, experts on that, so we didn't have to be, and something that we could roll in and get going really quickly. So part of it was marketing, part of it was technical, but I'm sure there's a lot of providers out there that you can look at. Can we host our GTMs in our network and host the rest in the cloud? I think so.
I can speak to that a little bit. I'm trying to interpret the question because it implies that...
well, here's the situation. My IT department owns the top-level domain for my website, and they're not going to hand over the control of that record to me to host on my GTM offsite. Can I virtualize the rest of my application infrastructure and still have our IT own the GTM layer?
Right, so the part I have to assume here is I'm going to assume they're talking private cloud. Because if it's public cloud, it's a much different scenario, and that's where it's a little bit different. Where you'd have GTM is typically your front door management, your geographical distribution management, and so if you put that in your private cloud, but then you actually put the application in the public cloud, that seems a little backwards, but you definitely could do it. In the case where you're putting GTM in the front, and then you're hosting the rest sort of in your private cloud, it's really just a typical deployment model where you have individual data center rollouts, and then you put GTM in each of the data centers, some linkage between those two, and then GTM just helps you manage the load across your data centers. But again, I think GTM, while it is a traditional product that F5's produced, it's also a really great example about the fact that F5 really does understand both elasticity and geographical distribution, because another way to view cloud is elasticity and large scale. So again, I was mentioning a few minutes ago about elasticity of your application resources, but also GTM is really great at geographically distributing your loads across data centers. It has native models for data centers, virtual servers, front doors, and that's a really good example of GTM being used to do sort of a private cloud model, traditional data center model, at a much larger scale.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here. One was tying into Viprion as well as VE, but this question from Rakesh, I hope I got your name right. Rakesh. Can we get equal or higher performance such as current connections per second, SSL, TP offloading numbers with VE than the hardware-based LTM Viprion? And I think I can say you're not going to necessarily get the same performance you will with hardware with the software. I think that's I think that's a good. I'm not really big in the numbers piece of it, but for me, that's a trade-off. That's why there's still going to always be a need for customers with hardware-based solutions, and that's where the hybrid piece may fall into.
Yeah, right? It's a little tough to compare the virtual edition with a Viprion box. This is not quite a fair comparison. In general, obviously, the hardware that you're running your virtual edition on is only going to get faster. So we should be able to increase your throughput numbers. If you're seeing CPU limitations right now, of course. If you're not seeing CPU limitations right now, then our 1 gigabit limit is our 1 gigabit limit that we've got. So you mentioned SSL, and I guess we're going to get faster. It seems like there was one question a little bit further down about the Intel Crystal Forest and the SSL crypto in that hardware.
What about Intel Crystal Forest and their SSL crypto in the hardware? Any acceleration on that?
That's we can't speak about anything in the future, but that is very, very new Intel hardware. And I'm not aware of all the performance that it has to it, but we would definitely look into something like that. That's about all I can really say for that. Yeah.
Let me also take the question from a little bit different perspective when it comes to, this is specific about SSL, but also it's the question on when do I use VE versus when do I use hardware. or what are the benefits of both, or how do I use both and sort of make that smooth transition. And there's a couple of different scenarios that come to mind for me. One is, we talked about sort of the performance hit to do SSL offload. And typically that happens in your front door. That's where you're doing all your SSL termination. And so if you build out a private cloud model, a hybrid model, where you have all your front door in the public cloud, then that basically means your SSL offload, if you have any, is happening in the public cloud. So if you've built out this sort of Viprion-based private cloud, that's not being leveraged, which is a dramatic waste of resources, obviously. So really the best way to sort of bridge the two is think about it in terms of, am I interested in spending my computing resources doing sort of the raw network termination? The termination both for SSL, but also cookie handling. There could be some expense there. And if that's not a constraint for you, then certainly you can go with the VE. It definitely has all the same functionality traditionally as the rest of the hardware platform. However, if you're seeing a pretty significant amount of investment in your sort of billing or your resource consumption on just terminating SSL, that's a great example where either putting, as Joe mentioned, putting Viprion or putting the hardware in front of the rest of your public cloud could be a great advantage. Now, the one thing I'd like to reiterate is, again, the advantage of our VE and our hardware platform is they have exactly the same control plane. They have exactly the same management plane. So you're going to get the same exact model across all of your APIs. And again, if you look at it as application-based, which I think is the real big shift in cloud, is around managing applications and not VIPs and VLANs and ports. So the fact that we have an IAP model that's supported across all of our platforms, including VE, makes that a much more straightforward operational savings.
And we've got somebody here who knows IAP, so that's good. I got one for you, Brent. Mike says, if you're building out a new data center and are looking at re-architecting application delivery infrastructure, I guess from scratch, and doing a more centralized and consolidated design, do you build VE or you go with Viprion?
Well,
a tough.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a yes or no.
Yeah, the answer would be it depends. VE certainly makes a lot of sense if you have a lot of smaller apps that you want flexibility with. You also get the benefit that is similar to Viprion, where you can kind of scale it. You can add more, you can take them away without having to be pulling hardware, whereas with Viprion, you can add blades, you can take them out. So there is some flexibility there, but really it's going to depend on what the apps are. Certainly one time where you wouldn't want to use VE would be if you had an app that was more demanding than what one VE could handle. So if you needed something that was doing 20 gigabit, unless you had some way to load balance your load balancers, that just wouldn't work out for you probably, and you would have to go with a bigger appliance or with a Viprion.
Well, going a virtualized environment too requires different knowledge and skill sets as well, right? So if you're thinking about the trade-off there, okay, you've got to understand somebody who understands managing F5 hardware already. Moving into the virtualized, now you got to have somebody who understands the virtualization setup, whether it's VMware or whatever, and that's not trivial. And there's maintenance there and overhead, so it's not just a trade-off. And that's one of the benefits we went with BlueLock, is that we didn't want to be experts in that. You guys take control and manage that piece for us. So there is a management overhead trade-off for going between the two as well.
Another great example of using the VE is around helping developers build their application out, and again reducing that operational expense to go and deploy it. If they have a VE accessible to them, then when they build the application, and again using IAPS, they can actually configure the VE, configure the network portion of it through IAPS, through a simpler interface, through either System Center for Microsoft or through VMware's vShield Manager interface. So they can basically build all the wiring up between the sort of not config through our app interface and the VE in their sandbox or in their sort of local dev environment. And then as you're building out your data centers with Viprion, then you can take those same IAPs and then deploy them in the data center. So that would be a good way of sort of leveraging that local sandboxed developer environment with the VE, but then actually run the thing in production based on hardware.
Yeah, we got another one, kind of tying into the IAP question from Enlightened VM. When will IAPs be able to orchestrate more than just a big IP? What about an IAP editor, like or better than the iRule editor?
Brand?
Well, as far as the IApp editor, it's something that's been tossed around internally some, the idea of making something like that. We don't have anything available yet for that. What was the first part of that question, actually?
It says, when will IAPs be able to orchestrate more than just a big IP?
Well, technically speaking, they could right now. IAPs have the ability because they're just written in TCL, and unlike iRules, most of the Tickle environment is available to them. So if you want to open up TCP sockets or exec shell commands and do some things to talk to other devices, that's open to you. What I would caution you there is that takes away some of the benefits you can get from IAPs, or more like I guess like a better way to put it is it's a little bit dangerous. Normally IAPs run with a transaction wrapped around them, so that if you make changes to your system and something happens and it doesn't complete, it'll roll all that back. Well, it can only do that for changes you've made to your local system. So if you take an IAP and you start making it make external calls to change other things on your network and something goes wrong, at that point you're responsible for managing that properly. So yeah, you have the ability to do some of that now, and we're definitely looking into ways to make that easier and to make that more flexible and powerful. But I just want to give some caution that you have some more responsibility whenever you're doing that kind of thing.
From Pete, what about our support for other hypervisors? I know, Jeff, you used to be deep ingrained in this. Is this stuff we can talk about yet, or do we know anything? Have we announced anything? Or
we haven't announced anything. KVM and Zen are both very interesting, as well as Hyper-V. I would say those are the 4 big hypervisors. And I would say stay tuned.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't. It's not all access here, right?
Right.
Control some things. Let's see. Do we know when VE will be, from Pete again, when VE will be integrated with CloudStack or OpenStack as part of the ELB service operating as an option? Does anybody?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah. So OpenStack, CloudStack, and OpenStack, but I'll speak to OpenStack more generically. OpenStack is basically an industry open source project, or industry. It's not really officially supported by any one vendor. It's basically a consortium of different grassroots open source developers with a variety of different industry players supporting it. But it's basically a way to build an orchestration framework that, again, looking at that infrastructure as a service model, where you have storage, computing, networking, and you have all these different individual vendors building their own APIs. And there's basically an open source project called OpenStack to create APIs for each of those vendors to plug into, and then that allows a private cloud, for example, administrator to manage their data center and the disparate number of vendors instead of actually managing individual storage layers or individual VMs. They can basically just manage a fabric of resources. So the way that plays with with us, again, we have iControl, which is a fantastic API to integrate with our control plane. But the question is specifically around the ELB service. And so that's a good example where OpenStack has historically built their integration with the networking infrastructure, that sort of traditional router, switch, layer 4 to layer 7 vendor offerings. They have a load balancing API, which is, again, your sort of standard create VIP, create pool members and pools, and load balancing algorithms. The challenge there, and we have fantastic support through iControl. We don't have any specific offerings ourselves, but there's some other vendors who've built iControl-based plugins for that, so that'll totally work. However, the challenge is, again, when you're deploying Exchange, or you're deploying SharePoint, or you're deploying aspects of DevCentral's stack, that's not just load balancing. We've talked about ASM, we've talked about APM, there's GTM that's come up, and so as it's called an enterprise load balancing service, there's no GTM, there's no ASM, and there's no APM. So all those different services that our ADC offers, and the things that we've talked about that are so valuable to your cloud deployment, unfortunately those aren't going to work today with just that load balancing API. So we don't have anything to announce today, but the key challenge there when you look at managing your application is how can you make sure that all your services are integrated in sort of a simple, connected, transactional model, so you don't have VIPs added and then somebody else in the NOC has to go and add the firewall rules. And if something breaks, your application is now down for sort of unrelated reasons, and you have multiple steps in the process. So the best way to make that work longer term is to view these applications running in the cloud as a complete service, a complete application, not just VIPs and pool members and IP addresses and a firewall rule, but really a complete application. And so we're definitely working with OpenStack. We've definitely got a variety of people at F5 who participate in those forums and talk to them. And we have open APIs to provide that. And then we're also looking at ways we can integrate the application model with those same solutions.
Got a comparison question between F5's VE and A10 SoftAX or Radware. I don't know if we want to get into comparison stuff here now. I would just say that our VEs are feature compatible with our products. So
Yes.
So do your own research on the products, and as for performance numbers, we list our performance numbers and things.
Yes.
So look those up on the side. I don't want to get into a bashing session back and forth. Obviously, I'm biased towards F5 VE, but that's probably obvious to everybody. So yeah, do your own research on those. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the best thing, to what Joe said is do your own research and do your own comparison. The virtual edition, you gain all the advantages of the hardware, but you gain all the, like Steven said earlier, you gain all the same interface as the hardware, and that's definitely an advantage.
It's not a stripped down version of our product. You
No.
get now. I think up to now all of our modules are running.
All of our modules are running as of 11.0, 11.1 for sure. Yeah.
So, thanks for the information. One more related with performance. If I have plenty of CPU power, so if I have the monster MIT machine that I can install Viprion or install VE on, can I get better performance than the Viprion? So if I can spend $100 million on a computer,
Right.
can I make VE run faster than Viprion?
Currently, the virtual edition is rate limited to 1 gigabit. There is no connections per second limitation or anything like that. It's a raw throughput of one gigabit. Also, I believe there's currently a 4 gigabyte RAM. TMM will only take, you can give it a whole lot more memory, but TMM will only take, the core traffic management processor will only take 4 gigabytes of memory. So that is current limitations. That's where
we're at now.
Right.
So yeah, if you got $100 million to spend, it's not going to really help you in this situation.
Right.
Talk to our sales department. You
Yeah,
might be able to work out some deal.
we can probably work. We can probably figure something out if you're throwing that much money at a problem. We can probably work something out.
A couple combined from Billy and Sasha asking about integration with Red Hat KVM and or VE on Amazon AWS. Is it available, supported? I think that'll fall back into the other KVM question.
I think we'll just say that KVM is very interesting. Red Hat, especially the questioner points out Red Hat KVM. It's doing very well in the market. It's definitely interesting. It's something that we are interested in. Same thing with VE on the Amazon Web Services or the Amazon Cloud. It's something we're interested in, something we're looking at, and I don't have anything I can announce today.
Yeah. From Pete, is there any collaboration with Chef or Puppet from a config management perspective as part of a platform configuration management?
Those are both part of the OpenStack. So
yeah, I can speak to that as well. George on our team did a integration with. We've got a couple tech tips in that line on DevCentral. So if you go up to DevCentral, search for Puppet, I think you can find George's application that will integrate with iControl and help you do some of that stuff. So
nice.
Yeah, it's a pretty sweet demo. So check it out.
Those are interesting tools, very interesting tools.
Is there any future for PaaS integration such as Stackato? I don't know what any of these things or path towards integration with PaaS in the future.
I can.
You know what
speak to that.
Stackato is?
I actually do not know what Stackato is, unfortunately. I'm going to assume it's not
Staccato?
a typo. So,
Maybe.
Staccato.
Staccato.
So
yeah, that sounds better.
I like Stackatos. I think we should stick with
Yeah.
that. Think an open stack. Okay.
PaaS, in case anybody sees the window, or they see the term when they're looking at different sort of cloud buzzword articles. PaaS is platform as a service. And again, coming back to the sort of three definitions that I gave earlier about the technology side of cloud. There's infrastructure as a service, which is your sort of traditional data center resources. Platform as a service is you can think of it actually much more similar to the browser-based development model or the Windows API development model, or the fact that iControl has an API for the control plane. Platform as a service is basically just exposing a set of APIs without touching the actual infrastructure. There's no access to big IPs or storage arrays or computing clusters. So instead, they look at, for example, a platform API could be store key or store value, retrieve value for a key. It could be, for example, do a math computation or do some kind of matrix multiplication. Basically providing a set of APIs to a developer to build an application on top of your platform. But instead of worrying about operating systems and storage and even the network topology, they basically just focus on business logic. And the question is, how do we integrate with that? And that's a great question, because traditionally F5 has offered a fantastic open SOAP-based API with iControl. But again, it is definitely traditionally more NOC-based. Most of the vendors in the networking space are NOC-based. Now, IAPs are really a great way to actually bring that forward. So we talked about VEs for developers being able to build their application with an IAP template in conjunction. The other aspect to it is, how can somebody take F5's products, big IPs, and then actually go and use our platform services too. So we don't have anything to announce today, but definitely the things we talked about with high-speed logging, the visibility into the performance of an application, those are platform APIs. And then, of course, there's Amazon's storage service. Azure has a whole bunch of platform APIs. Obviously, vendors can also use big IP platforms. And then in the IT departments, they also could use big IP to provide some of those application services for storage, the logging aspects to their applications, the network applications.
Looks like Staccato, I'll call it Staccato, that sounds better, is a wonderful app developer tool enabling developers to push their code easily and seamlessly from the private environment to a cloud. So it's probably something we should look at for some integration points. So it might be a good tech tip.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, I like it.
Just real briefly, so I can't speak to integration directly with Staccato, but again, it's a great example where a developer wants to push their application either for staging or into production, and the best way to do that long term, but across all operational models, is through an application template. And we have IAPs, which I think is a great model. But again, it gives them sort of the ability to go and configure their application parameters and click push to deploy or instantiate an IAP through iControl, and then they should be up and running, whether it's VE or the hardware platform.
Yeah, deploying is one thing, but maintenance as well. So when you're trying to do software updates for your applications, the concept that you've got 10 app servers, you want to roll out your application update to each of them while scaling users to different ones. That requires some real-time changes on the network as well. That the IAP will help you create that whole layout, but you kind of need the real-time for updates and the maintenance piece of it. Does anybody know about VXLAN?
I can answer that
from
one.
GVM.
So, go ahead.
Can your hardware terminate any of the virtual network layer overlays like VXLAN? If not, how can I use your hardware when I virtualize the data center network?
So VXLAN is the virtualization of the network. It's usually layer 3 tunneling. It takes a few different forms. VXLAN is the most popular, although VMware just recently bought Nicira, so I'm not sure how that's going to change things. Again, F5 is looking into it. We don't have anything to announce, and so you kind of have to stay tuned for that. There's another question about the VE. Go ahead, Sam's question.
Yeah, you can do it.
Is there a licensed lab edition available for LTM VE? Are there any options to renew or extend the 90-day trials license? The trial license is only on the 10.1.0 product, which is a little bit old now, seeing as how we're at 11.2. There is, as I recall, there's no way to extend the 90-day trial edition. You can, I believe you can get a new license.
You can just ask for one.
You can just ask for a new license, and then you'll have to reapply the license to it, and then you can continue. You have to get a new one, new license. There is, if you want to purchase the lab edition, the trial license I believe is like 1 megabit throughput, we have a 200 megabit and 10 megabit lab editions of the latest software, and you might find those a little bit more useful than the old 10.1. In addition, you get all the modules. The 10.1 Virtual Edition is LTM only, so you get all the extra modules that we've got on modern versions.
So the question was, is there a licensed lab edition available for VE?
Yes.
The answer is yes. So download it and try it.
Yes.
Let me also speak to GVM's question around VXLAN. Also, Jeff's got a great response, but also I wanted to mention the fact that VXLAN is basically VMware's network virtualization protocol. Microsoft and some other vendors are also supporting a very similar model. They're essentially really functionally compatible, but they're slightly different protocols, of course. And Microsoft's is NVGRE, and the real key piece there is, because the question was really on terminating the network protocol. So I think I'd mentioned earlier around the fact that there's no physical network interface for the VM to talk to. They're all virtualized. So when the traffic comes in, it has these extra tags inside the protocol to basically disambiguate which VM it should go to. Either a VMware hosted VM or a Microsoft Hyper-V VM. But basically the load balancer, the ADC, the actual switches need to actually terminate that protocol. But the other piece of it that's really critical, and we don't have anything to announce today, but we are definitely working with both VMware and Microsoft extensively on both these, both VXLAN and NVGRE. But the other really critical piece is not just terminating the protocol, but also the control plane integration. Because again, what's happening is the protocol is actually targeting a virtualized server. It's not hitting the actual physical interface directly. So there's that vShield Manager vSwitch, for example. Microsoft has a similar type of virtual switch. So what ends up having to happen is we have to keep mapping between the physical and virtual address spaces, so control plane integration. And so terminating the protocol is one piece of it. There's some vendors that have some solutions. They're at VMworld this year also. And we're definitely working with both Microsoft and VMware, but both the data plane and the control plane have to be synced, so that we can actually figure out which server is supposed to receive that information. And again, the whole point is the traffic is targeting a specific VM, and with the cloud, the idea is that you're spinning up new VMs essentially in real time and spinning down VMs, which means all of the ADC's tables have to be kept in sync with those VMs being added and removed. And so we're also working with VMware and Microsoft on those aspects too. So nothing to announce today, but we absolutely are working on it, and we'll be speaking to that more in the future.
All right, well, it looks like we're about at time. We've got a few more questions, but I don't know if they're short ones that we can answer in the last minute we've got here of our session. One about best practices for handling pool members that fail. Post that up to the Advanced Design and Config or maybe the iRole forum, and we can try to get somebody to answer that for you. Is there testing with VCE from virtualized network perspective?
So VCE is basically, I'll just speak to this real briefly. VCE is basically a packaged off-the-shelf solution which includes Cisco and EMC and VMware. It's basically just an integrated hardware solution that includes the storage and the networking and the computing pieces. And to be honest, we don't have bits directly in VC. We still have our traditional hardware offering and our VE offerings. But the same exact protocols that are spoken for every other VMware product or Cisco product, we definitely have direct interaction with. And because VMware is also a part of that VC offering, and we have integration with vCenter and vCloud Director and vShield Manager, the same kinds of scenarios should work. So.
All right, well, I'll finish it up here. Thanks for everybody who is sitting and tuning in to this. Hopefully it got you some more insight, and we answered some of your questions here. Thanks, Jeff, Stephen, and Brent for joining in, and we'll be back again next month. I think this video will be replayed later today. We'll get it up online. If you didn't get to watch the whole thing, you'll be able to replay it. And again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next month. I believe Microsoft's next, so we'll see. See you then.